Hello and welcome. This is text 4.1, the blog by George Scott, A Ride of Two Halves, and it's from Road Cycling UK. And we'll actually get to the document itself. Just go over the page and zoom in a bit. So as we can see, it's a blog by George Scott from Road Cycling UK, and again we've got the blog format here. We've got these little headings. These are all isolated words as effectively hyperlinks to click on to take you to other part of the website. I wouldn't dwell too long on this aspect of it, but it's just a generic convention of it. And notice that all of these actual lexical items all link to the area of interest, which is road cycling. So in terms of the audience, in terms of the context and everything, we've got one here that it's for specifically for people who are interested in cycling, and most specifically road cycling, obviously. With this, you're unlikely to read this blog if you're not interested in that subject. I mean, we're reading it because it's in the Anthology, a lot of us, but if you were really into road cycling, you may have encountered this before, you may be subscribed to this magazine in real life as well and visit the blog. It may dominate your thoughts, and it's something that you think about a lot. But actually on to the text itself. So again, generic features here of, this is like the website kind of sub-pages, isn't it, where it takes you to. There's presumably other blogs as well, so the other ones, and also George himself, George Scott, produces lots of blogs, presumably, about his cycling experiences. Then the opening title is A Ride of Two Halves. That's a phrasal template, because you'll have heard of things like a game of two halves is the most familiar version of it, but it's not really familiar collocation, it's a phrasal template, so it's following that same pattern. So this opens with a degree of familiarity for the readers, but it's also different enough to stand out and be memorable, so that's where it comes from for that as well. Then we've got informality in here in this blog, as it is a blog form as well, so George Scott is writing it. The audience, he's writing towards the audience assuming that they're interested and have knowledge of cycling, and he's obviously going to be writing with enthusiasm about cycling as a hobby as well. So we've got the actual opening section here, this opening paragraph. It establishes where it is with proper nouns there, La Mohaka, and if that's how it's pronounced. And technically this is metaphorical, isn't it? A 4-hour loop. It's technically a metaphor if it's a loop about where you actually go when you're riding around in a circle. Days 2 mountain ride left most of the group with sore legs ahead. This is to do with pragmatics, and the implied meaning is that the mountain ride on day 2 was difficult. So you could talk about the pragmatics there. But it's writing really with, presumably day 2's mountain ride was an earlier blog. So it works as a exophoric reference back to that other blog, potentially. But presumably you're reading these in series. You might have stumbled across this one and then you go back, but you're probably following the series of it if you're interested in it. Then we have a discourse marker here of trouble is. That's very conversational as a discourse marker, and George Scott's writing it as if he's almost as if he's speaking. So there's an element of multimodality here, where he's writing it like he's speaking it, and you're like jumping in partway through a conversation in some ways, except it's not a conversation because it's a blog, and it's obviously it's one particular voice, and it's written as well. So be clear about those particular contextual elements as you're writing it. Then you've got Northern Classics. This is going to be a specialist reference here, a cultural reference to that particular hobby. You'll know what this is. Northern Classics is a particular cycle race to contend with, and there was still plenty of opportunity to hurt the legs when sitting on the front of the bunch. That's metaphorical, isn't it, as well? But after an early cafe stop on the beachfront and a chance to work on tan lines in the sun, we ventured inland and continued on the planned route. So with this cycling blog, there's a juxtaposition here between the discomfort and the physical exertion and the beautiful surroundings and relaxing. So there is a kind of, you might notice there's a sort of holiday element to it, but it's also about pushing yourself physically as well. And so as a hobby, that's what road cycling is like, isn't it? It's the enjoyment, but it's also the personal challenge. And then you've got, this is actually the first planned route. This is actually a very subtle version of, you might see a little lexical set later on, which I'm not going to mention straight away, but you'll get an idea. Ventured inland, this is familiar collocation, you'll use ventured inland, but also ventured as a verb. It's more adventurous, it's more dramatic, it's more exciting. Then Andalusia is both beautiful and barren in equal measure. So you have, that's another phrasal template there. You often get something is something and something in equal measure. You often get that as a phrasal template. And so again, it's for familiarity purposes, I say. So for a blog, it's not literary writing, obviously. You want your readers to follow you along with it, enjoy it. You don't want to make anything too complicated or difficult to understand. It's informative, but it's really entertaining as well, isn't it, when you think about it? So you don't want to make it full of really complex sentences and make it overly, make it really kind of impenetrable kind of imagery and those kind of things. We've got parentheses here, which is another feature of spoken English, which is borrowed into this text, isn't it? So Mahaka receives just 200 millimetres of rain per year. A little bit of factual information showing that he's, I suppose in some ways there's an idea of you need to actually believe he's there with a blog. There's no real reason to doubt him, but if you're filling it with facts about things that are actually there, it's going to give it, obviously, lend it authenticity, which it is authentic, to be fair. You know what I mean? And we've got yesterday's mountain peaks have now been replaced by arid coastal plains, which really, again, is metaphorical when you think about it, because nothing's really being replaced. It's not like the scenery is being switched one thing for another. But it's an interesting metaphor, it's an effective metaphor, the idea that he's on a journey on this cycling holiday, he's going to different places. And it's a little to take the mind off the strengthening wind. So you'll notice there in terms of present continuous tense there. So take the mind off the strengthening wind. Sorry, lost the lightsaber then. Take the mind off the strengthening wind, the idea that it's building up and getting more difficult. So he doesn't want to, with the terms of the voice of this, that the holiday, the cycling isn't easy. It's not all. It's a challenge. It's not just a simple ride around. So the wind's making it difficult. Give me hills and a view to work for over a death march into a block headwind. So death march, that's hyperbolic as well, because he's exaggerating for effect there. But it goes back to what I was saying about the voice of emphasising the challenge of this, making it seem more dramatic, more adventurous, more exciting. So with 35 miles on the clock, that's another phrasal template. He's very keen on these phrasal templates in this. It's not a problem as such. It's just an interesting feature of his writing. He seems to use a lot of phrasal templates. So it's probably the nature of what he's writing about, to be fair. It's a mixture of blog, really, and a bit of elements of travel writing, I suppose, in some ways as well, isn't it? 35 miles on the clock, phrasal template there. Again, idea of precision, the idea it's actually doing these things. And a comfort break, a euphemism there for a toilet stop. And he doesn't want to obviously go into details. And split the group into two, that's metaphorical again as well, with the majority of writers opting to stay with the lead car and continuing on the original route back to Bidar, while our ride guide James and I turned right into the hills for a lumpier loop to base. So again, in terms of pragmatics, the implication here is that they're doing the more difficult ride. The other ones are doing the easier ride, but this part of the group are doing the more difficult one. And you've got lumpier, a comparative there, lumpier loop to base, and that's metaphorical. Now, base is there, and I'd said planned route before, and even with this as well, look, death march, base. There is actually a lexical set here of military kind of lexis, isn't there? Like army-related lexis. So I think he's going, in terms of the voice, he's projecting an idea that this is adventurous, it's exciting, it's more, in some ways using that kind of lexis is making it seem more dangerous than it actually is. But he's not really saying it's dangerous, but it's giving that effect. It's a bit more dramatic and exciting in the idea of it. Right, just going to scroll up. Then we have another discourse marker of we waved our goodbyes. That's a signal that we're moving on, isn't it? Going away from another part, we're splitting up from the team. and immediately turned off the main road to Los Galados and into the orange groves to begin a steady drag to the foot of a snaking 2-mile car-free climb. There's obviously proper noun there, and orange groves connotation of Spain as well, so it's all fitting in nicely for that. So locating the actual text, snaking, well, I've lost it where it is now, there it is, metaphorical there as well. With the ridge above us by now offering protection from the wind and beautiful views back over the valley for company. And that's mainly for that one. Then we've got, after a short descent, another discourse marker. We took a detour off our detour. That creates a sense of incrementum, isn't it? So you go build up there from, we took a detour, but then we took a detour off that detour. So it's building up, it's a build-up idea there, so incrementum, building it up. So again, it's really, that's the effect is, and it links to voice, the idea of challenge, of difficulty, it's all coming through there. But enjoying the challenge, that's part of the other part of the voice as well. And then we have, training camp. Visited the area, who had previously visited the area on a training camp of his own. Training camp, more military lexis there as well. Seems a bit hyperbolic, doesn't it, in many ways? I mean, it is just cycling, but you can have a sporting camp for training, so it kind of works, but you combine it with those other lexical features that suggest the military, it builds up an overall picture. And then Wheels in Wheels, keen to explore a back road over the ridge which took us back to Bidar. Then we now had the wind on our back and clipped along comfortably. Clip's a nice dynamic verb. It suggests ease, doesn't it? Ease of travel, to clip along. At 55 kilometres per hour, presumably using kilometres per hour. He used miles there, look, and he's using 55 kilometres per hour there. Why is he doing that? Why is he inconsistent with metric and imperial measurements? Well, the answer is, of course, it's a higher number if you use kilometres per hour, so it looks more exaggerated. It's more the idea that he's going faster. It's not as fast as it looks. It's still quite fast, but if you put it in kilometres per hour, it looks more impressive. Then on a rolling road, that's technically metaphorical as well, isn't it? A familiar collocation with a gradual downhill gradient. So there are some specialist kind of terms here which make him sound like he knows what he's talking about. He's very much into the hobby, which is going to appeal to the target audience, who are other cyclists as well, which felt like heaven, similarly there as well. So again, go back to the idea in this of it's difficult but it's fun. And after the wind-restricted progress of the morning, by now, another discourse marker for this paragraph, we were in the middle. This all creates cohesion, these different discourse markers at the start of the paragraphs. Notice that because it's on the computer as well, or most people read these things on their phones these days as well, all the paragraphs are really short, and that means they're easy to read either on a computer screen or even better on a mobile phone screen as well. So it's a simple point, but it's worth bearing in mind as well about a bit of the context of it. Then we've got, by now we're in the middle of nowhere. This is an interesting phrase. That's a familiar collocation, but of course it turns, it's from the perspective of someone going somewhere else. If you live in that area, it's not the middle of nowhere as such, is it? Not entirely short of the route with only a farmer and his herd of goats for company. But this is what cycling is about. Exploring uncharted territory. So this is hyperbolic, familiar collocation as well. And it's not really uncharted territory. It even mentions there's a farmer. So this farmer lives there. It's not really uncharted, but it's from the perspective of him going somewhere else. So you can link all this stuff in with the military lexis, with this sense of adventure, this hyperbole. You can see what's happening with this blog. It's about making the cycling seem like a real adventure. That's the idea. Uncharted territory with the wind and sun on your back, that's a more familiar collocation as well, and the traffic-free road rising before you. So in many ways, again, the pragmatics are that in England it's busy, there's lots of cars around, but if you're in Britain or England or wherever, if you're in this part of Spain, it's going to be more, presumably, I mean, you may not be English, that's why I said that, but you've got, it's quieter in Spain to actually do this. Then, after one wrong turn and then another, more incrementum there, we took a dirt road and descended into the valley, crossing the bone dry riverbed. That's actually bone dry is familiar collocation as well, isn't it? Before and picking our way up on the track on the opposite side of the mountainside before the tarmac returned. That's metaphorical as well, because tarmac is not famous for its ability to return at all, is it, when you think about it? So that's got to be metaphorical as well. Then James was now back on familiar territory. It again, that's obviously got territory, familiar territory. That's got connotations of adventure then as well, of returning somewhere safe after an exciting adventure somewhere else. And we climbed up on the hillside on a series of steep ramps with a beautifully smooth, freshly laid road surface. With Bidar in sight, we skipped another dynamic verb which conveys ease of travel, doesn't it? Ease of movement, ease of cycling. Past the turning for a villa and joined the rest of the group in the village for a cold drink after 90 minutes of some of the best riding of the camp so far. So again, that juxtaposition of difficulty, challenge, enjoyment, that's what the voice is on this one. So hopefully you found that useful, and there's plenty more to listen to. Hope you find those useful too. And if you have things that you want to hear and suggestions, let me know too. But anyway, thank you very much for listening. Goodbye.